Next week he's off to Israel, Dubai.
It's nice to see so many of you here for the unveiling of the information panel to Peter Potter, here in a road named after him. Having been asked to do the introduction a while ago, I thought, what do I say? And the answer is not a lot, because there are other people who knew Peter a lot better than I did. So my introduction will be as short as it can be. I remember first seeing Peter some years ago, and it was the first time myself and my wife had attended the memorial service to the 7 lost airmen of Lancaster DV 177 of 626 Squadron. The memorial in Colchester Road, Ipswich Road, Colchester, get that right. And who are also commemorated on a number of road names nearby. And it was there that I learnt some about his service, some of his service. In that same squadron, joining afterwards, making up the numbers. And as you will no doubt hear from others, he was a rear gunner, which has been described as the most loneliest place and the most dangerous place in Bomber Command. You'll also hear of the number of operations he was on, I'm sure. And at a time when the average life expectancy of a rear gunner was 5 to 6 operations, some didn't even reach that. When I saw him at subsequent services in Ipswich Road, I came to realise that he was there not just to remember that particular crew, but the rest of his squadron, and he represented the men, the very brave men of Bomber Command, of whom over 55,000 lost their lives during the Second World War. And so we gather here to hear the remarkable story of a remarkable man. Thank you.
This is a very important occasion. I'm delighted that so many people have come along here. And I'd like to thank Elmstead Parish Council and Hills Developers for agreeing to name one of the roads here after Peter Potter behind us, and also Lancaster Way over there. I was thinking, what could I say about one of the most remarkable people I've ever met? Because I didn't meet him until his later years through Boxford Airfield Museum, and has been alluded to at the naming of Lancaster approach off the Ipswich Road. So I wondered what it was I could say about a remarkable man. And I thought, well, I've got grandsons aged 18 and 21. And the significance of those ages are this: at the age of 16, Peter Potter told the authorities that he was aged 18. And he joined the RAF. And as a teenager, aged 17, 18 and 19, he was flying on Lancaster bombers over Nazi-occupied Europe. And before he was 20, he was stood down because miraculously he had been on 30 or more of these missions. And as you heard, the average was only 5. The death toll was astonishing. Half of Bomber Command lost their lives in the Second World War. But Peter, as a teenager, aged 18, that's the same age as my second grandson, was flying these death traps, dropping bombs on Nazi-occupied Europe. At the age of 21, the age of my eldest grandson, had been stood down. So that put it into perspective for me, what a remarkable person he was. He was a gentleman and a gentle man. He was just an astonishing person, one of many And I look around here, there can be few of us who were even alive when he was helping to liberate Europe. And I think it's very fitting that in what became his home village, he is to be recognised and he's going to be honoured in the way he is going to be. So my thanks to everybody who's been involved in this very special occasion today. Very fitting, I think, that it's in the start of the poppy appeal. Some of us managed to get a poppy today, but many of you, I know, all of you were getting poppies. So we remember Peter. We remember him not only today, but for his family, and 2 of his daughters are here, his friends, and he had many friends. We remember him, we thank him, and we are grateful to him and those of his generation who gave us the freedom that we enjoy today. Thank you.
As chairman of Boxted Airfield Museum, it's a delight for me to be here today to pay tribute to Peter. His connection to Boxted Airfield was that when the large bomber formation crews were stood down and the war was coming to an end, they were looking to get the airmen closer back to home. And Peter at that time was at West Mersey, so Colchester, Boxted Airfield was an ideal location. And the Air Ministry hadn't decided what they were going to do with Boxted Airfield, so they were looking for a group of airmen to come and look after the base. And Peter was one of the senior officers there at that time. And he was dealing with flight control, and there was a few American servicemen still there from the American service period. And they generally looked after the field until 1947. Now, my connection with Peter was the first time I met him. This is a slightly amusing story, so I thought I'd relate it to you today. The first time I met him was in 2004, when the landowner where the museum is situated had kindly agreed to let us open up the farm for fly-ins. And we'd done these since 2002. And they'd grown in size over the years, and we were attracting a few thousand people to each event. And Ron, who's standing to my right, was with me on that day, and we were preparing the site. And for those of you that know the site, know where the airfield memorial is, we were over on that right-hand side on the field. And this car come driving in past the memorial and onto the field. And we thought, oh, somebody driving onto our site, what do they want? So I went across, and gentleman opened the door and he said, oh, I've heard there's going to be a fly-in here at the weekend, so I thought I'd come and see exactly where it was. And I said, yes, you're correct. I said, but unfortunately you've driven on the site and we want to get on with the preparation. And he duly stepped out of the car and shook me by the hand, as Peter always did, and said, well, I was here in 1945. And of course, we're always looking for veterans who can tell us about the history of the airfield, and also we do the research on the veterans' military life as well. So that was a delight to meet him. And then he would come along to as many open days as he could, and Janet would bring him along, and later on Ron brought him along as well. And he would always be as smart as you always saw him, with a suit, all his medals on, his RAF badge, and he would bring along his life story in all his folders, and he would spend the afternoon talking to anybody that would listen. He was an absolute delight to be with, and we miss him a lot. So wherever you are, Peter, thanks very much.
Well done.
Peter told me that one day when he was going to Wickenby with his rucksack on his back, and he was stopped by a man in a garden, and he said, young man, have you got a car? He said, no, I haven't got a car, can't afford a car. He said, well, come and have a look at this one. He opened the garage door and it was a 12-cylinder Lagonda sports car. He said, I can't afford that. He said, yes you can, how much have you got? He said, well, I've got £3, 10 and sixpence. And he said, well, give me the £3, you can have the car. He went to a garage to get petrol, and they called the police because they thought he'd stolen it. They marched him back to the man's home, and he said, no, that's okay, that I've sold this car to this young man. And Peter said when he got to Wickenby, the guards on the gate saluted him, thought he was an officer, which he wasn't. And they're my memories of Peter. They're wonderful memories. He was such a charming gentleman. Thank you.
I first met Peter at Boxford Airfield Museum, and after we found we lived in neighbouring villages, he asked me to help write and publish his book. It was a great honour to be asked to do that, and in the many months it took, I got to know Peter and Janet very well, and we spent many happy days together. He introduced me to his family, including his younger sister Jean, and I was lucky enough to find out that she had an eligible daughter, Anne, who is here with me today. And Peter was very chuffed to have been a matchmaker. Thank you. Peter was delighted with his finished book and having his tales properly written up for his last remaining years. If anyone hasn't seen the book, there are some copies available here today. Peter and his dad also live on at the website staybehinds.com, which commemorates all the men and women of the auxiliary units, the secret army that he was in before his RAF call-up. I was most privileged to be able to take Peter along to march in a wheelchair to 2 Remembrance Day parades at the Cenotaph in London on behalf of the auxiliary units. With his RAF moustache and all his medals and people waving to him, he loved every minute. Like many people, I continue to miss Peter's great company.
I first met Peter about 20 years ago. Having served in the RAF, I did have something in common with him. Also, we were both members of the Boxted Airfield Historical Group, better known today as the Boxted Airfield Museum. Peter, as you've heard, was stationed at Boxted Airfield during after the war. We soon became good friends, and I would often drive him to various events and memorial services, sometimes flying with friends in their light aircraft. On one occasion, we planned to fly from Earl's Colne to Peter's wartime airfield at Wickenby in Lincolnshire for the yearly memorial service which was a very special event for Peter, and he made the great effort to get there every year. Ian Brearley, our pilot and friend, had arranged to fly in his Cessna 4-seater light aeroplane. For an agile person, access to a Cessna is quite accessible, but not quite so easy for a 90-year-old gentleman. And Peter duly got stuck and had to be more or less pushed into the cockpit. We were very concerned about this, and Peter was totally exhausted by the time he got into the cockpit, and we had to administer some oxygen. But he assured us that he was perfectly fine to carry on, and he was. He was fine for the rest of the day, and we had a very special day indeed. This was just one example of Peter's can-do mentality, and he certainly lived up to his 626 Squadron's motto: to strive and not to yield. Peter's abilities was soon recognised in the RAF, and by the time he was just 19, he had been promoted to the high rank of warrant officer, the highest rank of a non-commissioned officer. Having lied about his age when he joined up at 17, he refused officer training to be able to stay with his crew and complete the tour of 30 operations. Peter and his crew were very lucky to survive their 30 operations with Bomber Command. 1,080 aircrew members were lost flying from the 2 squadrons at Wickenby. I regarded it as a privilege to be his friend. Whenever we met up, it was with a firm handshake. He was a man of integrity with a strong sense of duty and service. His RAF service he regarded as a duty during the war, and in peacetime he worked in the community service as a nurse and then as a fireman. Here in Colchester, he was based in Colchester until he was very badly injured in a house fire at Wivenhoe, which eventually ended his fire service career. The recognition given here today has been very well earned and indeed well deserved. I'd like to conclude with my personal tribute to Peter and read this poem that Peter wrote during his wartime service at Wickenby, entitled From My Heart, and it's dedicated to the ground crews. Those who flew were not alone. Behind them stood their friends unknown. The fitters working day and night, their chief reward an A1 kite. Sparks who service wireless gear, avoiding isolation, fear. The riggers working hard to heal the damage done by flying steel. The electricians gave us light and circuits strong throughout each flight. The armourers who handled tons of bombs and laboured on the guns. WAFs who drove the transports round, all the toilers on the ground. Bowser drivers, cookhouse bods, 1,000 willing odds and sods. Supported by their skill and care, operations in the air. On ops, when in turns and dives, to them we knew we owed our lives. Thank you.
Hello everybody, I'm Val Peter's eldest daughter. On behalf of my sisters Sheila and Sylvia and our families, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to all involved in making today happen. Dad would have been very touched, as we are, by the decision of his friends that he deserved this recognition. When we were growing up, Dad didn't speak in great detail about the war and his part in it. In fact, we probably heard more about his years as a psychiatric nurse at Friern Hospital in London and then Severals in Colchester before becoming a fireman. Of course, we knew he had been a rear gunner, but it's only as you grow older and have your own families that you really appreciate what war actually entails. It wasn't until I was typing drafts, chapters of his book, that I discovered what frightening experiences they had been through on their bombing raids. Our grandparents must have been petrified by the possibility that their only son might not return to them. East Mersey knew when Dad was on leave, as he entertained the locals in the Dog and Pheasant with his singing and yodeling, Slim Whitman style. He actually had a good singing voice, which sadly none of us inherited. I'm not sure if that was in the book, Hugh. Thank you to all who've spoken so kindly about Dad today, and to everybody listed in the programme for their input. It really is much appreciated. Finally, before the unveiling, we'd like to give special thanks to Chris for his years of dedication to this project. He and Lofty have been amazing in keeping us updated every step of the way, involving us in the design of the information plaque and respecting our opinions, and we can't thank you enough. Thank you all once again for coming today to pay your respects to Dad. Thank you.
So many people are here. It's lovely, isn't it?
Just going to take the flags off the road signs now if you want to come across.
63, you can. Well, that's very good. Peter would have loved to have been here. He would have, oh, but I know. You know what I mean. Lovely. Lovely.